Hey, we're live. We are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Linux Academy's AWS Security Webinar. I hope everybody's having a good day. We're doing quite all right over here, and I'm really happy that you're all available to join us today.
Hello, everybody. Let me introduce the team here. My name is Thomas Haslett. I'm the head of AWS content here at Linux Academy.
We're doing quite all right over here.
Linux Academy's AWS Security Webinar.
Hello, everybody.
So, let me introduce the team here. My name is Thomas Haslett.
So again, welcome. So let me introduce the rest of the team here. Again, I'm Thomas Haslett, head of AWS content. Really happy that you're all available to join me today. I have two of our training architects. I have Trent Hayes and Mark Richman. Trent, why don't you go ahead and say hi to everybody?
Hey, everyone.
And Mark, go ahead and say hi.
Good morning, everybody.
It's good to have everybody here today. So a question for everybody in our chat. Where's everybody from? I'd love to see everybody post where they're from anywhere around the world. I'm curious to see who may be the furthest away from Keller, Texas, which is where our main office is. Let's see what kind of responses we get here in our chat. A little bit of a delay here. We'll see as these things start to pop in. So also, I just want to let everybody know, if anybody's interested, we are going to be having World Cup updates throughout the webinar here. So I know some of you may be interested. You may be watching on a separate screen. So I will keep everybody informed as scores pop up. So feel free to also put into chat any teams that you may be rooting for that are playing right now, or maybe what your teams are in general, because I know the World Cup is pretty popular all around the world. So let's see, we're getting some people coming here. So, okay, so we have Brazil, India, Vietnam, India, Virginia, San Diego, Sydney. All right, Brazil. Wow, we got a lot of people from Brazil. Well, yeah, your guys' World Cup game is tomorrow, so I'll be interested to see how that plays out.
What time is it in Sydney right now?
What time is it in Sydney?
It's tomorrow.
It's 1:30 a.m. tomorrow morning in Sydney right now.
Oh, okay.
But all right, so let me just kind of recap quickly what we're going to cover today. So the general topic is going to be automation or security automation in AWS. And there's some really cool tools that AWS has developed and released recently that we're going to cover. Now, specifically, we're going to talk about some trends in AWS. We're going to show a hands-on example on keeping CloudTrail logging, so making sure that CloudTrail is constantly running. Then also a hands-on example of automatic resource remediation using AWS Config. So we're going to go through each one of these points. We're going to talk about each one of these topics, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to learn a lot about AWS security. So if anybody else also wants to in our chat, if you want to drop in what you do for work in terms of if you work specifically with any of these services or work in AWS security or just IT security in general. We'd love to see some background in some of you guys. So feel free to, at any time, kind of post anything about your experience with AWS security. And then also, we're going to be doing some Q&A throughout the webinar as well as a block at the end. But there will be several times throughout the webinar where we may just stop for QA as we're waiting for AWS to provision things on their side, especially with AWS Config. There can sometimes take a little bit of time for it to trigger certain aspects of that particular service. So before we jump in and get started, though, I do also want to make note of our July content release. So those that are current members of Linux Academy, you may have seen our content launch back in April. We have another content launch coming up in July, in which we're going to release over 150 new pieces of content. So a combination of courses as well as hands-on learning activities. And so it's going to be a huge content release that is going to be done throughout the month of July. We will have several live streams that are going to cover all of the contents that we're going to release across all of our different content pillars. So please make sure to follow us all on our various Twitter, LinkedIn profiles, and we can make sure to get updates out to all of you on when we're going to go live with those live streams. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Trent Hayes, who's going to walk through some brand new trends in AWS security that he wants to talk about and share with all of you.
Yeah, so in watching a whole bunch of reInvent videos and preparing the security specialty course that we're releasing next month, we've come across some big trends that are becoming very important, have been important for a while, but are becoming increasingly important. The first one I wanted to talk about is multi-account strategies or organizations. If you're using a traditional single AWS account, there's a potential for IAM bleed because IAM policies are global per account. So if you're running your dev environment, your production environment, and your developer sandboxes or whatever in the same account, there's a possibility that any kind of incident could bleed over to different environments. So the recommendation is that we use organizations to firewall off the different segments of our companies. I'm going to switch to a diagram here, and we're going to talk through this just a little bit real quick. And so we start with making sure that all of the logs, we first start with the security account up top, and then we have the production account and the development account, and then sandbox accounts or whatever other departments that you might need in your organization. So we set up CloudTrail to log to a single bucket in the security account. That way we can monitor and react to API calls that are being used throughout the entire organization from one place. But what this allows us to do is that any interaction between these accounts has to have a specific IAM role and a specific STS assume role. So instead of, for instance, if we're in the same account and I give someone EC2.star, they can interact with any instance in that account. But now if I want to give someone from the development account access to do EC2 in the production account, we have to do cross-account roles, STS assume roles. We have to assign accounts, assign permissions. So it's a much more explicit process than the IAM role bleeds or IAM permission bleeds that we can have in a single account. Mm-hmm. And if we have an incident, we can isolate it. So if this development account gets compromised, it will not affect production at all. So we limit that blast radius of any kind of incident.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question just also to everybody watching right now. How many people have currently working in AWS on the security side with multi accounts or in organizations that has had issues like this? Because I think it's a pretty common issue and something that AWS has been working to solve, especially with working with multiple accounts across organizations. So yeah, I'm curious to really know how anybody in our chat here that has dealt with this before, maybe how they've gone about finding a solution for this, or if what you're seeing here helps for some of the issues that you've certainly faced. So that we'll kind of let that come back through the chat here. But Trent, if you want to go ahead and continue.
Okay, and so now I wanted to move on to a little bit about automation. Let's talk about some of the newer services that we have. Config, we'll talk about more in just a minute, but Config allows us to do two different things. It will pull in all the resources from our account, and it will log configurations historically. So if we had someone that had an IAM problem, or we found an incident that happened maybe a week ago, we could roll back to see if their IAM permissions had changed and they were able to do something that they're not supposed to. We also have Systems Manager, which we can pull the OS versions from our servers, from our instances, and compare those, and also automate the patching process of them as well. We can also run remote commands on servers without having to SSH to each one. It's a beautiful solution if you're running thousands of instances. And then we have Inspector, who kind of works with SSM a little bit, with Systems Manager. Inspector compares your instances to known vulnerability lists. It also compares it to the CIS benchmarks for AWS security and can report back on that. And then we can actually set that up to react to the instances to patch particular vulnerabilities automatically. There's a couple of learning activities on those things inside of the course that's going to be released next month. So you get a chance to have hands-on experience with that. The next one I want to mention is Guard Duty. It's fairly new. It was released right before reInvent last year, and it's basically an intrusion detection system. And it's looking at threat databases. It has its own internal. You can assign others from the external to it so that it can alert on patterns. Like it'll tell you if an instance is Bitcoin mining, for instance. And then you can use that to invoke Lambda to either shut that instance down or take whatever action you need to take automatically. So that's just a few of the services that are out there that are becoming very important to automation, but also on this new security specialty exam, they are on it very heavily. So it's getting covered in the course, and you'll get lots of hands-on experience in this upcoming course with these services.
So Trent has teased something here, and that is, not that it's been much of a secret, but Trent and Mark have been working on a brand new course for the AWS Security Specialty exam. So obviously that's one of the reasons why they're both here on this webinar today, and they are working on that, and that will be released later next month. So everybody should be on the lookout for that. We're excited to add that to the Linux Academy list of content. And yeah, we're super excited about that. It's going to be really, really cool. It's going to have tons of hands-on learning environments, interactive diagrams, some really great exams and quizzes. And so I'm super excited about it. It's going to be really cool.
So cool. So I'm going to move on to a very simple automation example. I'm going to share my screen again, and let's talk about how we can keep CloudTrail rolling in our accounts, making sure that it's constantly logging. So let's switch back to here. Oh, one sec. There we go. And we'll go to page 3 there. And let me drag this over so that we can see a little better here. Okay, so here's the workflow that we're going to look at. We're going to be monitoring for any time the stop logging call is issued to CloudTrail. Now, there's a couple different reasons why this can happen. It can be an accident. Someone can accidentally turn off logging, but more often than not, it's going to be on purpose. So someone can do something that they're not supposed to be doing and they don't want it recorded. So this is a simple little process to make sure that it stays on if it's disabled. So I want to skip.
So just a quick question here. So this would be a specific example for, right? Obviously, CloudTrail is super important to log everybody's actions inside of AWS. And so this is to help prevent if somebody were maliciously to turn off logging in order to do something nefarious in an AWS account. But then also just if somebody were to accidentally stop logging or turn off CloudTrail logging. So you certainly see the importance of this to make sure that if for some reason it were to be turned off maliciously or not, that we can know about it and then make sure that it's automatically returned to logging.
And there's
I understand that correctly?
Yes, yeah. And the other point I wanted to bring up about that too is a lot of organizations have compliance issues around this. They have to have auditing all the time. So if this gets turned off accidentally and you don't know it, you're not notified, or you haven't automatically turned it back on, then we can run into some compliance issues,
right,
in a big way. So here's the workflow we're going to do. We've got CloudTrail. We have a trail enabled. I'm going to open that right here and jump over to trails. And so trail 1 is enabled. We can see that it's logging right here. So the next thing I want to show you is the Lambda function. And Mark, while I'm doing this, can you put the GitHub link in the chat for them so they'll have access to the Lambda functions we're using? Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm going to open Lambda in a new tab here.
Yeah, unfortunately, YouTube won't let me paste a URL.
Ouch.
Yeah. So I'll just say it's github.com/Linux Academy. And then you want to go to a repo named this, which I just posted in the chat. It's the AWS Security Webinar June 2018 repo.
And Mark, you could also, if you also too, you could Slack it over to Jacob and Winnie, and they, since they're the admins, they could probably paste it in.
Is Slack working?
Some URLs. So.
Yeah, we've had an interesting morning with Slack. Okay, so
I don't know who else around the world uses Slack for their organization. Sorry, Trent, but yeah, their Slack has been up and down this morning, which has made things certainly interesting. But sorry, go ahead, Trent.
Oh, you guys can't see the chart on the left? I just saw that. Hold on. Maybe we'll just move it over a little. Yeah, Slack is down again. Oh, great. All right, so then we have CloudTrail enabled, and then we're going to create a Lambda function. I've got it right here. And it's going to, let me scroll down here. So what it's going to do is when it gets triggered is it's going to make sure that the event name will stop logging. And if it is, it's just basically just going to start the logging again. It's a real simple Lambda function. It's less than 100 milliseconds to execute. So this is a really cheap solution for your security process. So we have that. We've got the CloudTrail is on. So let's go set up the CloudWatch Events rule, which is going to paste all of this together, really. So we go to, sometimes this menu gets so messed up. I don't know why. Nothing's ever where it's supposed to be. There we go. All right, so if I go to, I'm going to create an event rule here. And we're going to make sure that it is for CloudTrail. And we're going to use a specific API call for stop logging. So here is what I got to click away from that. There we go. So there's the event pattern. Anytime anything in CloudTrail stops logging, it's going to run these targets. So we'll go to the Lambda function, which is the CloudTrail fix that I showed you here. And then just for good measure, I want to add an SNS topic because if we just run the Lambda function, we don't necessarily know exactly when it runs. So we're going to just add an SNS email so that we can get alerted when something has happened. We'll just call it CloudTrail fix rule and we'll create it. Okay, so now the chain is complete. CloudTrail's there. CloudWatch Events is looking for that API call. And Lambda will react to the event and SNS will react to the event. So if I stop logging, we should get an email right here. And Lambda should re-enable the logging automatically. So let's see what happens. It's going to ask me if I'm sure I want to do this. Yes. And so we'll just give this a couple seconds. It doesn't take long to run.
So as we're waiting for that, any updates on the World Cup here? I see that Sweden it was 2-0 Sweden over Mexico. Now it's 3-0. That may have been a little while ago, but it looks like Sweden has that game locked up.
That's really bad news for Germany.
Yeah, so that's 90 minutes. It looks like that's going to be a final.
All right, so
any minute now.
Interesting. Should have already run. Of course.
Hashtag live stream fails.
Yes, live stream problems.
Well, it gives us the opportunity to do a little bit of diagnosis here and a little bit of troubleshooting. Which is anybody knows that is working in AWS is something that you are constantly doing. It's something as a DevOps engineer, as a SysOps admin, or as a solutions architect is a very required skill set in AWS. As most people know, nothing will generally work 100% all of the time. And especially when you're putting together new event rules and things, they always have to be tested.
There we go. Okay. I was about to say, something's going on.
Trent may have figured it out.
What did I just do? I'm sorry. Oh, man. I meant to hit the refresh. Sorry. 1 second.
It's quite all right.
That's another thing you'll do.
Like I said, these things happen with AWS and IT, and no matter how much time I spend in AWS, I always find that I'm constantly having to read through documentation, troubleshoot various aspects. So again, it's a skill set that it is required. So did.
Yep, it re-enabled by itself. I didn't actually click the logging button that time.
Okay, I think I was kind of talking over that. So try to maybe just run through that again.
All right. So anytime someone turns off logging, it'll take just a second, and I'll refresh here in just a second. So logging is off. So the event rule's reacting. It's pushing to Lambda, and the email is being kind of a pain right now. So, but if we go here and we refresh. Logging is back on.
That's awesome.
So I see a comment in the chat about the SNS topic. I had that previously set up. It was there, but so that's it. It's a simple little way. We'll get you access to the Lambda function, and it's a simple way to make sure CloudTrail is running in your account. Now, also, you can use this in a multi-account role. If you're back on that scenario where you've got multi-accounts into one CloudTrail bucket, the Lambda function gets just a little bit more complicated because you have to have cross-account roles to be able to do this, to reenact or to re-enable logging in a separate account. But it's the same concept, and you can do this across your entire organization to make sure that you're still logging API calls.
Yeah, I just think this is really cool. I mean, any time that we can implement, any sort of automation, especially as as SysOps admin, security experts, having that automation in place, one, it gives you a little bit of peace of mind, and then certainly through notifications that you get through SNS, it will alert you when anything goes wrong. But to have it then just not just tell you that something went wrong, but then to actually fix the problem. So to turn logging back on, I think for on so many levels, it's super important from a security perspective. And like you said earlier as well, it's also from an auditing perspective. Last thing you'd ever want to do is have logging turned off and miss something important, and then have certain auditing issues because of that. So super important. I think that's a fantastic example of some easy automation in AWS that it can be very powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you're talking about automatic notifications, automatic remediation, logs are everything. So you have to have the logs up front to be able to do any of that. So that's an additional reason why it's incredibly important.
Cool. Anybody have any questions specific to the example that we just showed? Because we are going to move on to another example, but I would love to have any questions that you guys have on that, and we could certainly address those now and as we move forward through the next segment as well.
I do see one comment there that he believes that he can use the same approach for various AWS resources. Absolutely. Lambda basically just uses the Boto 3 SDK. You can use these types of functions for all kinds of remediation stuff. And you'll see it again in the next example we're going to show you. But a lot of it's available out there on the internet. You just got to search around a little bit for your particular situation. But yes, the same process works for a ton of different resources. So
there's another question here too that I want to ask you. So it was asked, when you switch off CloudTrail, will that log in CloudTrail?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Yeah, the trail still exists and the API call is there. What switching off logging actually does is keeps the trail from reporting to the S3 bucket, but the actual CloudTrail top-end calls that are above that trail are still working. So if you stop logging on a trail, CloudTrail sees it and still sends the API call. So that's why that was working. So
interesting. Another question here says, can we automate Lambda? I would just say, can you be a little more specific with what you mean? Can we automate Lambda? And then we'll come back to that if you can be a little more specific, but awesome.
Cool.
So Trent, did you have anything else in that?
No, that was a real quick little demo. I mean, I think we're ready to move on to the second one, and if we'll just keep an eye on the questions there as we go.
Awesome. We'll certainly do that. So we're going to hand it off over to Mark Richman right now, who's going to demo out one of our hands-on live AWS learning activity environments and walk through some really cool stuff with AWS Config. So Mark, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yep. So let me just share my screen out here real quick. And so we're going to be talking about AWS Config.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Like Korea just went up 2-0 on Germany. I didn't see that, and so that looks like Germany's done.
Yet again, the champs won't make it out of the group stage.
Wow,
pretty wild.
Sorry. World Cup interruptions. Back to you, Mark.
All right, am I sharing?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we're going to talk about AWS Config, and I have 2 demos prepared, actually, a complex one and a simpler one. If we have time, we'll get to both, but I'll start with the complex one first. So like Trent said, AWS Config, it lets you audit the configuration of your AWS resources. So what does that mean? So it's continuously watching all of your resources, and it can let you automate the remediation of any of its findings against your desired configuration. So in layman's terms, what this means is you can use it to automate compliance, for example, security analysis, change management, or any kind of operational troubleshooting. In this case, I'm going to walk you through this diagram of a scenario that I've put together for demonstration. And this demonstrates a very common scenario where you have an EC2 instance in a public subnet, which is exposed to the public internet, listening to all IPs. So we have a public subnet in a VPC, a single EC2 instance, and that lives in a security group where SSH is listening on all IPs. We typically don't want to do this. It's a big security risk. It leaves yourself open to attack. And in our environment here, we're simulating that we have an on-prem data center connected through a VPN. So the data center is listening on this 1010 network, and we want to restrict the access to the EC2 instance to just this data center, which means that we want to automate the detection and remediation of the security group rule to switch it from all IPs to the IP of the on-prem data center. So let's walk through how to go about doing that. So first thing I want to show you is here in EC2, we have a couple security groups that I've already set up. This is the one that comes out of the box, so to speak, listening on all IPs on the public internet. So we want to set up AWS Config with a rule to detect this configuration and automatically remediate it using a Lambda function. So we have AWS Config here. It's watching the entire set of resources here. When it finds a security group which violates the rule, it's going to invoke a Lambda function, and I'll walk you through that code as well, which will switch the CIDR block of that security group to that of the on-prem data center. So from there, let's go to config. And let's get started. And we want to set this up here. So the types of resources we want to record all resources. And you typically don't want to do all resources if you have a very specific case in mind. In this case, I'm looking at security groups, but also later in the demo, I'm going to be looking at an S3 bucket. So you typically want to scope it to just the resources that you want config to operate on. But for the purposes of this demo, I'll just set it to record all resources. Then config wants to write all of its data, all of its configuration findings to a bucket. So we're going to go ahead and create a bucket in our environment here. And then we want to assign config a role. So this is a role that needs read-only access to your environment because it wants to look at all of your resources in read-only. And it needs permission to send information over to a topic on SNS. So I've already pre-configured a role. So I'm just going to choose that role. And we'll click next. And what we're going to look for is one of the many predefined rules that that config offers. So you can see here, there's lots of different rules that you can apply, everything from auto-scaling groups, CloudFormation stacks, DynamoDB, lots of security-related stuff. We're particularly interested in restricting SSH. So this is a rule that will check whether your security group disallows unrestricted incoming SSH traffic. So that's our scenario here. So we want to select this rule and click Next and confirm. And this just takes a few seconds here. And here you can see here, your resources are being discovered. So this can actually take a bit of time. While this is running in the background, I'm going to continue on with a couple of other setup tasks. The next thing we need in this configuration is an SNS topic for everyone to be notified on. So this will allow me to receive email notifications whenever the Lambda function executes or whenever config has a finding to report. So we'll create a new topic here, and we'll call it My Topic.
I think SNS has to be one of my favorite AWS services.
It's like a Swiss Army knife. You can do
really
just about everything.
You can do so much with it, and there's a bit of a love-hate relationship as well, because there have been times where I've set something up and then all of a sudden, within 5 minutes, I've gotten 150 messages, and I'm like, okay, I set this up incorrectly, or I don't need this type of granular notification coming my way, and I discover that pretty quickly. But there's a tendency to flood yourself with information because you're learning, and then it just becomes noise. But in this case, I'm just creating a subscription here to this new topic. It's an email subscription. If you're not that familiar with SNS, you can receive notifications on all kinds of channels, HTTP, email, Lambda functions, SQS, etc. But we're just going to do an email topic here. And I'm going to subscribe my demo email inbox here. Don't send me any emails here. I usually don't read it. And it says here pending confirmation. So we need to switch to our inbox, and this should take just a second. So we get a notification here, and we want to subscribe to the topic. And we're subscribed. So any notifications that config or our Lambda function send over, they'll show up here in our inbox so we can actually see some real-time activity. And if we refresh, we see that we're now subscribed. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to set up our Lambda function. So we'll go over here to Lambda, and we want to create a function. And we want to do this from scratch. And I'm going to call this remediate-SG, SG for security groups. Our runtime here, and Lambda has been growing tremendously in terms of its coverage of various programming languages. When I started doing this a couple of years ago, there was only, I think, 4 languages supported. Now we have C#, Go, my favorite language, Java, Node.js, Python. Yeah, my shameless plug for Go. But this one we're going to do in Python. And we can either create a role or choose an existing role. And what this role allows is the Lambda function to access other resources in AWS. So in this case, we want to write to CloudWatch logs. We want to be able to look at EC2 and so on. So I've already predefined a role, and I'm going to choose that role here. And we'll create our function. So congratulations, our function's been created. And we can see here that here's our function. We can choose a number of triggers on the left. And we have a number of resources that we have as implicitly as part of our role that we have access to. So like I mentioned, E2, SNS, and then S3 is the bucket where you might log some additional information. So we want to scroll down here, and it gives us some boilerplate code, which we're going to replace. So let me switch over to the GitHub repo that we mentioned earlier. So now, I don't know if the URL ever posted to the chat, but you can see here, it's just Linux Academy AWS Security Webinar June 2018. So it's a repo that we created specifically for this webinar. And we have a couple sections in here. One is the CloudTrail Lambda function. And this is the Lambda function that Trent showed earlier. So that's there for you if you want to go off on your own and reproduce this. And these are a couple that I'm working on here. The one that I'm demoing right now is remediate security groups. So we'll grab the source code for this function. The best way to do this that I found is to click here where it says raw, and this will just get the raw text. Hey, Mark, is there any way that you can adjust the screen a little bit to the right, or I don't know if Jacob, our producer for there, they're in chat. They're saying that the left side of the screen is cut off on the live stream. So I don't know really what you can do, Mark.
I could squish my diagram a bit, maybe.
Are you in full screen, Mark? You can come out and move.
Yeah, I am in full screen. Want me to pop out of that?
Maybe to move it over. That might work.
Yeah, it'll just take a couple seconds for everyone else on the live stream to catch up with that. But I'll just give it a second before
you're good,
so no one gets lost.
You're good.
Okay. And if the font is too small, folks, just let me know. But we're just going to copy all of this out of GitHub, and we're going to replace here in our editor. This is the Cloud9 editor that's now incorporated in Lambda. And you can paste that in, and I'll just walk through this code a bit. Anyone in the chat? No issues seeing the font? Okay, great. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here in this Lambda function is we're going to import Boto3. So Boto3 is the Python SDK for AWS. And next, we're going to grab our account ID and our config client. So this is the client for AWS Config itself. The rule name, so this is the AWS Config rule that we chose earlier, restricted SSH. Client for EC2, so we can get to our security groups. An SNS client, so we can send messages to our topic. And then our topic name here. So we're constructing our topic name with this ARN. I'm doing this in US East 1 in that region. If you're in a different region, you're going to want to change this. And if you're using a different topic other than the one I created called my topic, you're going to want to edit the function to use your own topic name here. Otherwise, this obviously won't work. Subject, this will be the subject of the email that you receive. And then we have our entry point into the Lambda function. So all Lambda functions have this signature here called Lambda handler. It's effectively the main entry point of the function. It accepts an event and a context. And without really going into too much detail about every single line, because I know not everyone here is a developer, basically what we're doing here is we're getting an instance of any rules that are, or any resources that are not compliant. So AWS config is running in the background. It's looking at all of our resources. It's looking at our EC2 instance. It's looking at our security group. And if any of these are non-compliant, it's going to flag that as non-compliant. And this Lambda function will be able to see that non-compliant resource. And you can see here, it's looking at the evaluation results. It's going to grab those results, and it's going to send a message via SNS, via email, to notify us about any non-compliant resources. Once it notifies us about those resources, it's then going to go ahead and automatically remediate it for you. And that's the cool part of this whole solution. So it's the automatic remediation. So if our resource type is a security group, we want to get the security group ID. And that's the get sec group function that I have here. Basically, this is just going to get the security group ID so that we could pull out from that the VPC ID. Both the security group ID and the VPC ID, we pass into this other function here called remediate SG. So we pass into that function the CIDR block that we want to apply to the security group. Remember from our diagram, this was 0000/0, open to the public internet. We want to automatically switch that to 10.10.0/16, which is the CIDR block of our on-prem network connected through VPN, to which we want to restrict SSH access. So in our remediate SG function, we grab our VPC ID, our security group ID, we remove all of the old security group rules, and we replace them with a new ingress rule with that CIDR block. So that's what this code here does. So it removes the old rule, adds a new rule on port 22 with that new CIDR block. And then we go ahead and click save. And the next thing we want to do is set up a schedule that's going to run this Python function or this Lambda function on an interval. So we'll go to CloudWatch. And in CloudWatch, we want to create a rule. And that rule can either run based on an event pattern or on a schedule. In this case, we want to create a schedule, and we want to have this Lambda function run every minute. And for our target, we'll choose the Lambda function, remediate SG. This is the name of the Lambda function that we just created in the previous step, and configure details. So again, what this is going to do is every minute, it's going to run this Lambda function. The Lambda function is going to look for any findings that config reports and automatically remediate our security group. So we'll set this up here, and we'll just call this remediate SG, and we're going to create the rule. You can see here this icon, this green clock icon. That means that the rule is active. And here we can look at the rule.
Hey, Mark.
Yes,
if
sir.
You can, go full screen again. I'm being told by Jacob that they should have the screen being
go
cut
full screen.
Off.
Aye.
All there. So anybody in our chat here can let us know if it is still cut off, but we will get everything set back up here so that we got a nice split screen.
Yeah, let me get the split screen back up. This is
for those that have taken some of our newer courses. You'll notice that we do a lot of split screen in our courses with a diagram on the right, an interactive diagram on the right, and the AWS console on the left, or sometimes vice versa, depending on the course. And really, I think it's a really powerful method of teaching, because anything that we are doing in the AWS console or in the CLI, right, we have it visualized on the right side of the screen in a diagram form. And it allows you to visualize things that may not be visual, whether it is the AWS architecture that we're building, or whether it's the AWS workflow that we are building and working through. The ability to visualize what we're doing when we're doing it at the same time on the same screen, I think is a super powerful teaching tool, and something that I think our students have really enjoyed so far. So that's why we try to do it here on the live stream as well, to give you that context, that one-to-one connection between the visual and what is actually going on in the AWS console.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Mark, I think I don't see your screen anymore here in Zoom. I don't know if you stopped sharing your screen, or I'm just seeing you, which is not a bad thing, but
let's see what's going on. The magic of live internet. How's that?
Perfect.
That's my favorite word.
But anyone else, please let us know if you're still seeing anything cut off on the screen here. But hopefully everything is looking good now for the split screen here.
Okay, so we're back here in config. So just to recap, we created our Lambda function, we created our SNS topic, we created our CloudWatch rule. It's running on 1-minute intervals, looking for any kind of non-compliant resources reported by config. And as luck would have it, this already found a non-compliant resource. It's funny because, just as a side note, we've been talking earlier in preparation for this webinar about how long config takes to detect certain things. Sometimes things can take 20, 30 minutes in config. And, are we going to have trouble with this webinar because the config rules won't pop up for 20 minutes and we're going to have to all kind of scramble to, cover other content. But as luck would have it, this already detected while we were just doing our sidebar here, a non-compliant rule. So config already discovered that we have a violation of our restricted SSH rule, and it will tell us which security group is non-compliant. So this one is compliant. This is the default VPC, which I already have as closed to the public internet. And then we have another one here, which is non-compliant. So if we look at that, we can see here that, oh, look at that. Our Lambda function already ran, and it switched our source from 000/0 to 10.10.00/16. So here is the CIDR block of the on-prem data center. So you can also see that it sent us a couple of updates here in our inbox, that we have a violation of our restricted SSH rule, and it's this security group here. We keep getting a couple of other messages here. You'll actually notice this in config because of that delay. You'll find that it was remediated before config can catch up. So you may actually continue to get emails like this for a few more minutes until config reevaluates your environment, and then you'll stop getting these emails because Lambda won't find anything. So switch back here to EC2, all's well. And just kind of want to recap what we did here. So we created a config rule looking for a non-compliant security group, which is this unrestricted SSH rule here in our security group. We created an SNS topic to receive notifications via email. We created a CloudWatch rule, which runs on a schedule, invoking this Lambda function right here. And the Lambda function will update the ingress rules on our security group. So do we want to take a quick break for Q&A? Or I can move on to the other demo, which is automating S3 bucket ACLs.
Sure. I know that some questions have come through, and we could try to address some of them here. Let's take a quick look here. So Jeremy said, maybe when a security group changes in any way, rule is triggered.
Yeah, I was going to say that in studying this security automation and taking a look at a bunch of different ways that this can happen, there's several paths that you can take. CloudWatch Events, some services can talk directly to SNS, and then that can fire off the Lambda function. So you almost have to map it out to see what's best. In this particular example, this was designed to be auto-launched as a lab in our course. So there are things that are pre-rolled into this environment. So just to answer those questions, but absolutely, you could trigger this several different ways.
Cool. And also, if anybody has questions that we don't get to during this webinar, because we are already hitting about the almost close to the 50-minute mark here, you can always go over to linuxacademy.com, go into our student community, ask questions there. All of our course authors are in our community all day answering questions from students. So feel free to jump on over, join our community, and ask any questions that you have over there that we don't get to today. So yeah, Mark, why don't you jump in and continue on with the next demo?
Yeah, sure. So the next thing that I want to demonstrate here with config is to evaluate public ACLs on S3 buckets. So just a quick tour through S3 here, probably one of the most popular services, maybe next to EC2. So one security concern that you're definitely going to want to keep in mind for S3 is when you create your buckets, you don't want to necessarily want to create your buckets with public read access. So there's been a lot of security incidents with large public companies leaking sensitive information, personally identifiable information, PCI sensitive information in inadvertently public S3 buckets. So we'll create a bucket here. And these have to be globally unique, so I'm just going to make up some random characters here. And we're going to set this bucket here under permissions. We want to grant public read access to this bucket. And I'm doing this deliberately so that we can have the Lambda function automatically switch the ACLs back to private when the config, when AWS config has a rule that flags it. So we'll create a public bucket here, which is usually a no-no. And it's so much of a no-no that when AWS changed the UI for S3, they made it very obvious that they don't necessarily want you creating public buckets, or at least want to bring to your attention that you're creating public buckets. So we have our bucket. And next thing that we want to do is we want to go back to Lambda. And we want to, just like we did with remediate SG for security groups, we want to have another function here, remediate S3, call it remediate S3 ACL, Python 3.6. We'll choose that same role because it's the same permissions that we need, plus S3. And we'll create our function. And just like before, I'll go back to our GitHub repo and go to raw, select all this code out. Paste this here, and I'll step through this as well. Actually, I grabbed the wrong function. Sorry about that.
So two questions here that just popped in. So one of us is why can't we trigger Lambda whenever config rule? Sorry, that was an older one. What thresholds can I set to trigger a CloudWatch alarm? That was one question. I don't know if we need any more specifics on that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Trent, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I responded to that in these particular cases, we're actually not using CloudWatch alarms. We're not alarming on metrics at all. We're actually using CloudWatch events as either scheduled, or in the first example I showed, it was an event looking for an API call. So it's not actually on the alarm side of CloudWatch. So there's like 3 different parts to CloudWatch, and we're working with the events and the rules right there in the middle. So
gotcha. And another question was, if we have multiple accounts, can we have one Lambda function and config to validate all the accounts?
Yes. I mean, you can do pretty much anything like that with cross-account roles. You just have to make sure they have all the right permissions to be able to make changes.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's all available.
Cool.
Typically, what you would do is your security account would have all the logging, and then you would do cross-account roles. Anytime that security account needed to assume a role into another account to do some remediation, that can absolutely be done. It's a little more difficult than what we're showing today, but it's basically just one additional step. So.
Cool. All right, Mark, back to you.
Okay, so here we have another Lambda function, very similar to the one that we saw earlier to remediate the security group. In this case, we're going to remediate the ACL on the S3 bucket that we just created to remove the public access to it. So again, we're importing Bot03, the Python SDK for AWS. Similar to before, in this case, the rule is the S3 bucket and public read prohibited rule. And again, if you want to create your own rule name, you certainly can. If you're doing this in your own environment, you're in a different region, just change the region, different topic, change the topic. And here it works just like we saw earlier. We're going to grab, if there are any rules that config reports, we're going to grab the result of that evaluation. From that, we're going to grab the bucket name. We're going to send a message on SNS. Not sure if this actually ran yet or not. Let's see what happened. This may have already run. Nope, the other one's still running. Okay. So we're going to send a message on SNS. We'll get an email. And then here, our resource type, we're looking for any buckets that are reported by config. So from here, we'll grab resource ID, which is our bucket name. We'll create an instance of our S3 client. We'll grab a reference to the bucket. We'll get the ACL from that bucket. And then we're going to put here a new ACL, setting that thing to private. So we'll go ahead. We've already saved that off. We can go back here to config, and we could see if the rule has evaluated yet. No, it's not. So this is one of those cases where it does take quite a bit of time to run. Like I said, we got lucky with the first one. This one will probably take a little more time than we have in this webinar to complete. But the end result of this, just to
what is some of the average time that it can take for these rules to execute?
Yeah, I typically see on average about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
It's config's not.
So basically, what that Lambda function. Go ahead, Trent. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good.
Okay. So basically, all that Lambda function is going to do is it's going to grab the bucket. Actually, need to go here, the bucket, and we need to go to permissions. And all it's going to do is remove the public access.
And since this has a little bit of a delay right now, I want to reiterate again that this is an actual learning activity that is coming out in the course next month. So you'll all have a chance to jump in and get your hands dirty with this particular activity.
So you can see here, I just removed the public access, and if you were keen enough to catch it, it removed that little orange icon. So this is exactly what the Lambda function would automate for you. And that's about it for the demo.
Awesome. Okay, so that wraps up the hands-on demo portion of the webinar here. So we're just going to move into a bit of a Q&A. We have about 5 minutes or so for some Q&A. So if you have any specific questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to address a few of them here. And then again, anything that we don't address, feel free to go over to linuxacademy.com and join our student community over there. You can ask all the questions you want, and all of our AWS and other training architects as well are always available there to answer any questions that you have. So always feel free to jump over to our student community. All right, let's see what we have here. Do we have a tentative date when the Security Specialty course will be out? So it will be launched later in July. So look for it second half to late July. And one of the cool things about the security courses, I've looked at some of the hands-on learning activities that Trent and Mark have been put together, and you just saw one of them here. They're some of our best hands-on learning activities that we've put together in terms of depth, complexity, and especially right now, a lot of these brand new security features in AWS, which are just really, really cool and awesome. So it's going to be an excellent course. And in the style of our AWS courses that we have moving forward, we have full interactive diagrams as part of the course. In the style of Orion papers and Project Omega, if you've taken any of our other AWS courses. So it's going to be really cool. Let's see. Do you have the code links? Yeah. If Jacob, if you can again post in the YouTube chat the link to the GitHub, that would be great. Okay, so what are some other questions here? See, can you run all the AWS config rules be triggered as part of CI/CD pipeline when the stack is getting created instead of once it is created?
I'm actually not sure about that one. I know that Inspector will integrate into your CI/CD pipeline to look for vulnerabilities if you're using instances or maybe even container instances, but I'm not sure about integrating config with that. I haven't run across that yet, to be honest.
Let's see. Another one is, can we force AWS config to evaluate rules explicitly?
Oh, you mean like manually? Yes, there is a spot in the config where you can jump into a rule and you can reevaluate. You can choose reevaluate, and it'll run it whenever you want. But that has a little bit of a time delay too, just like Mark mentioned with normal rule sets.
Right.
This isn't an instant service at all. I wish it was. It'd be awesome. But so there will be some time when you're unremediated by using this process.
So another one here from Zachary. It says, apart from AWS CloudTrail and AWS Config, would you prefer or would you refer any other AWS resources for enhancing security automation?
No CloudTrail events and rules, and any API call that you want to secure, you can do it. You just have to be able to write the Lambda function and trigger it with a CloudWatch events. That's kind of the middle of most of the automation workflows is CloudWatch events.
Gotcha. Okay, so we get one more minute here. I'll read off one more question. So let's see. When applying automated remediations, can the code notify the original object creator modifier of the change via email or SNS?
That is a great question. I think we'll look into it and get back to everyone. I want to say yes, but we'll have to look into it.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly on that either, but yeah. So okay, so we have hit our 59th minute. And so it is time for us to wrap things up here, as I'm sure you all have busy schedules and we have things to get to as well, making more amazing content for all of our Linux Academy students. So before we wrap up, I just do want to say, again, keep an eye out for our July content launches. We're going to launch over 150 brand new courses and hands-on learning activities in the month of July across all of our content pillars. So AWS, Linux, Google, Azure, DevOps, OpenStack. We just got courses coming out all over the place. So please feel free to come back, check on those announcements, and we're going to be having several live streams throughout the entire month of July, in which we're going to be announcing and releasing all of that brand new content. So please join us for that. And again, thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your busy days and schedules, whether it's during the day or some of you in the middle of the night, to come join us for this webinar. Please let us know what you thought of the webinar as well. You can go over to the linuxacademy.com community and let us know if you liked what we did here today. We would certainly be open to doing many more of these in the future. We love having this type of live engagement with our students, and I hope that you all find it beneficial. And if there are certain topics you'd like us to cover moving forward, again, you can drop that into our community and we'll make note of it. And hopefully those are things that we can cover over the next months as we move forward and look to do more of this type of live engagement with all of you. So thank you all for joining us. Trent and Mark, you want to say a goodbye to our great students here?
Yeah, thanks everybody. It's been great, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right, thanks everybody. Everybody have a good day. I'll see you all later.